Good morning on this Thursday, December 15th, 2016, the day we mark the 225th anniversary of the Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments that were ratified in 1791 to protect the individual rights in this country. It was on December 15th, 1791, that the state of Virginia became the last to ratify the amendments to the Constitution. So we want to begin this morning's Washington Journal with your thoughts on the Bill of Rights and which one or ones are most important to you. Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, and Independents 202-748-8002. You can also go to Twitter at C-SPAN WJ or post your comments on Facebook.com/C-SPAN. And we'll get to your thoughts here in just a minute, so start dialing in. The First Amendment, though, as all of you know, begins with Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. The Bill of Rights go on, the Second Amendment, saying a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And of course, the Fourth Amendment is another one that many people are aware of. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by the oath of or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The 10th Amendment, the first 10 amendments constitute the Bill of Rights, reads, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So we are asking all of you this morning on this 225th anniversary to tell us which one is most important to you, that you remember. We'll begin with a frequent caller in Allijay, Georgia. Joe, a Republican. Joe waits his 30 days, and you are on.
Yes, thank you, Greta. I love C-SPAN, been calling 30 years. Greta, mine is the freedom of speech. I think the freedom of speech, to be able to speak, to be able to call into great shows like you do, which I do all the time, and express my feelings. You know, I'm a conservative, and thank God for your network. I can call in and express my feelings. And I just want to add one thing. I think Donald Trump will be the greatest president in history, and I'm glad that I have the freedom of speech to call into your wonderful network and say that. But y'all do a super job, Greta.
Well, Joe, and it's interesting as a conservative that you wouldn't first mention the Second Amendment.
Well, I think the right to bear arms is very important, too. I own a gun, and I hope I don't ever have to use it, but I certainly believe in the Second Amendment. I think, but I'm the most, Greta, I've been involved in politics 54 years, and I'm the most fired up I've ever been. I think Trump, the stock market, under Trump will break every record in history. So I'm just a real fired up conservative, but I love C-SPAN. You and Steve Scully and Peter Slin, y'all all do a fantastic job. I tell everybody how great C-SPAN is because you are.
All right. Well, thanks, Joe, for that boost of confidence this morning. Appreciate it. Bob in Westminster, Maryland, independent caller. Hi there, Bob. You are next. Good morning. Tell us what you think about 225th anniversary here. Which Bill of Rights is most important to you?
Well, I would say without a doubt the Second Amendment. As a grandson of a man who escaped the Bolshevik Revolution, I know very well what happens when you cannot defend yourself. And quite frankly, without that one, none of the others would matter, because the government, and when you read Madison and the Federalist Papers and the rest of them, you wouldn't have any means to uphold this from a tyrant. And that was their thinking, to provide a counterbalance. And this whole thing about a militia, people don't realize that all of us are the militia. And without this, we become just like any other country, and then we become very vulnerable to a despot taking over. And yet, you really don't have much, because the restrictions on many states to have a gun on your person to defend yourself it's totally useless if the attacker has a gun and he comes to you. Well, wait a minute, I'm going to go back up to my house to go get my gun. Well, I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way. And I think that helps us defend against all kinds of terrorism, crime, and other things. And I understand that there's a move to create universal reciprocity where if you have a permit in one state, it should be honored in all others, like a driver's license. That alone would change the balance, because the career criminals and terrorists just assume that most people are not armed, and they're correct.
Okay, Bob, we're going to learn a little bit more about history. Jeffrey Rosen is joining us on the phone, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center. So, Mr. Rosen, let's begin with what and who caused the Bill of Rights?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me, and happy Bill of Rights Day. Very wonderful to mark the 225th anniversary. So James Madison, who was the principal drafter of the Constitution, initially resisted a Bill of Rights. He thought it would be unnecessary or dangerous. He thought it was unnecessary because the Constitution itself was a Bill of Rights, because it constrained government power and gave Congress no authority to abridge freedom of speech or to take away the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And he thought it might be dangerous because if you wrote down certain rights, in the future, people might wrongly assume that if a right wasn't written down, then it wasn't protected. But he changed his mind in the face of the opposition of the anti-federalists. And there were three in particular. And if you come to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, you can see statues of them in Signers Hall standing at the back of the room because they refused to sign the Constitution because it contained no Bill of Rights. And they are George Mason of Virginia, Edmund Randolph of Virginia, and Elbridge Gerry, or Gary of Massachusetts, who gave rise to the phrase gerrymandering. And basically, they thought that this newly empowered federal government could be too dangerous, and as the last caller just said, might take away the people's right to bear arms or infringe the rights of speech. So in the face of this opposition, the ratifying conventions, when they agreed to approve the Bill of Rights, recommended further amendments. And Madison changed his mind. He proposed a series of them. Congress decided to propose 12 amendments for ratifications, not 10. And again, if you see an original copy of the Bill of Rights, we have one at the National Constitution Center, you'll see that the original First Amendment was not the one involving freedom of speech. It was one that said there should be one representative in Congress for every 30,000 inhabitants. There'd be something like 4,000 congresspeople today if that had passed. The original Second Amendment said that Congress can't raise its salary without an intervening election. That became the 27th Amendment in the 1990s. So our First Amendment was their third, but those first two amendments weren't ratified. And on December 15, 1791, exactly 225 years ago today, the first 10 amendments were ratified and became part of the Constitution, and they came to be known as the Bill of Rights.
When you look at the preamble to the Bill of Rights, some say that's where you find the purpose of them. And when they wrote that the conventions of a number of the states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire, where did that desire come from?
It came from amendments proposed by the state ratifying conventions. Some thought about making their ratification of the Constitution conditional on the adoption of further amendments. Others just recommended the amendments. But basically, when they sent their ratification certificates to Congress, they added a series of amendments that they recommended as better able to secure the safety of the retained and unalienable natural rights of the people. And basically, they just cut and pasted from their state constitutions. So when Madison made his list, he wasn't making them up out of thin air. He was taking from Virginia, which already protected the rights of speech or the right of the people to keep and bear arms, or Massachusetts, which was the closest analog to our Fourth Amendment. I have to put in a plug here for the wonderful National Constitution Center Interactive Constitution, where viewers can go online at constitutioncenter.org or at our app, Interactive Constitution, and click on the original Bill of Rights and see its historic sources in the Revolutionary Era state constitution. So you can see how much the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 looks like our Fourth Amendment, or how much George Mason's Virginia Bill of Rights influenced Madison's First Amendments, and it's really interesting to compare the text. But these were rights that, remember, the Declaration of Independence talked about people being endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The framers were people of the Enlightenment. They believed that these rights came from God or nature, not government. And when Madison had to write them down, it didn't take him a long time because there was such a broad consensus about what these unalienable and natural rights were.
Well, Jeffrey Rosen, when you think about that tradition of individual rights in American culture, how does that apply then to today? And will the Bill of Rights be around for centuries to come?
It will. I was so inspired by the first caller. What a great thing to say. Thank you for C-SPAN. Thank you for the right of freedom of speech and the fact that he felt the freedom to, talk about how much he was enthusiastic about the next president. The Bill of Rights has affected our culture. And this was Madison's hope. He thought it would be useful. Not, some people just attacked bills of rights as parchment barriers that could be easily overcome if these rights didn't live in the hearts and minds of the people. But they've become so central to our American identity that all of us come to expect them, and we would demand them whether they were written down or not. So obviously the Constitution goes through many challenges, and it's designed to withhold strain, but the Bill of Rights has come to be America's central contribution to constitutionalism, the idea that there are certain basic rights that can't be taken away, they constrain and limit government, and they promote freedom. And I think it's going to be around for as long as America survives.
Well, Jeffrey Rosen, it's a lot of history to talk about in just a short amount of time. So as you alluded to, our viewers can find out more if they go to the constitutioncenter.org website. Also visit the Constitution Center as well. And Mr. Rosen, how are all of you marking this anniversary?
Well, we're having a great Bill of Rights Day, and we're thrilled that C-SPAN is going to broadcast it. I think it may not be live. It'll be broadcast soon. But we have 4 phenomenal books on the Bill of Rights, including one by Akhil Amar, the great Yale law professor, a great book on the Second Amendment by the head of the National Rifle Association, a wonderful series of books about the future of capital punishment, and then a great book about lost documents and how some of the original copies of the Bills of Rights were stolen and returned to their original owners, in some cases with the help of the National Constitution Center. So it's going to be a constitutional feast. I'm going to moderate one of the talks, and we've got other great moderators, and we're going to be celebrating a very happy 225th birthday for the Bill of Rights.
Jeffrey Rosen, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And let's get back to all of you. Lou in Highland Park, Illinois, a Republican. Good morning. Thanks for waiting on the line, Lou. So talk about the Bill of Rights, the most important one to you.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
First of all, I'm a Democrat. So
okay.
Maybe I called into the wrong number.
Well, we'll let
anyway,
you go this time. Go ahead.
To me, the most important amendment is the Ninth Amendment.
Okay.
Because I guess the framers realized that they're human beings and they could have made a mistake and left out a very important right. So they put in the amendment that says even that we have rights, even though they're not enumerated in the Constitution. We still have those rights, which I thought was a brilliant move on their part.
And we'll apply that to today. I mean, how do you think that? What does that mean?
I sort of like reading the Constitution, and the word privacy is almost not even in the Constitution. There's some words that say privacy in a different way, but there's no right to privacy stated in the Constitution. So, for example, if a woman feels that she needs an abortion or wants an abortion, the Ninth Amendment gives her that right, and I think it's true that she should have that right, even though there are many people in America that say no, it's murder and all that kind of stuff. I think it protects her, and part of the Roe versus Wade was based upon the Ninth Amendment.
Okay. All right. That's Lou there in Highland Park, Illinois, a Democrat. We'll go to St. Paul, Minnesota. Lawrence, an independent. Good morning, Lawrence. You're on the air. Lawrence, you with us? Let me try that again. Oh, Lawrence, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, it's your turn.
Great opportunity to speak to C-SPAN. What makes the United States great is our Constitution. The only country that was founded based upon codified laws as opposed to tribalism. Perfect, of course not. But I think it's what we as Americans all share in common. And my last comment is to expand on the Second Amendment, because a lot of people believe the word militia means military, and they are different. Militia includes using the citizen soldier, that every citizen has a right to protect themselves and, at a moment's notice in a crisis, be able to act on behalf of the government when you're, quote-unquote, deputized, so to speak. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for the opportunity, and I will enjoy the discussion.
Okay, more calls coming up here, but first, the White House yesterday made a presidential proclamation and said that the Bill of Rights Day 2016 would be today. After much debate and deliberation, this proclamation says, among the framers, the first 10 amendments to our Constitution were written to reflect a compromise between preserving the rights of individual citizens and supporting a strong and secure federal government. Since its ratification on December 15, 1791, the Bill of Rights have enshrined many of our most fundamental liberties and unalienable rights, including the freedoms of speech, worship, and assembly, the rights to trial by jury and due process, and the protections from unreasonable search and seizure and cruel and unusual punishment. For 225 years, the Bill of Rights has shaped our nation and protected our citizens, and today, in honor of all those who have worked to secure these freedoms, we strive to continuing forming a more perfect union guided by an enduring belief in these highest ideals. It was originally created, the Bill of Rights safeguarded personal liberties and ensured equal justice under the law for many, but not for all. In the centuries that followed its ratification, courageous Americans agitated and sacrificed to extend these rights to more people, moving us closer to ensuring opportunity and equality are not limited by one's race, sex, or circumstances. So the proclamation ends saying, now, therefore, I, Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim December 15, 2016 as Bill of Rights Day. I call upon the people of the United States to mark this observance with appropriate ceremonies and activities. Stephen in Windham, Connecticut, Independent. Good morning, Stephen.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for taking my call, C-SPAN. I think the most important, especially at this time in our history, is the 15th Amendment, which covers the 65 Voting Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Department out of President Obama's Justice Department is so underpraised. They have been the greatest civil rights department, especially under Eric Holder and now Loretta Lynch, ever in the history of my memory, and they should be lauded. You can't underestimate the yeoman's work these people have done. Just seeing Eric Holder wade into the crowd was so heroic. I cannot speak enough about his Justice Department. They really did great work.
And what do you think about the people's voting rights going forward?
Well, Jeff Sessions from Alabama, I've followed C-SPAN for 20 years, so I've seen Jeff Sessions speaks a lot. But Alabama is not necessarily known as the heart of civil rights outside of Martin Luther King's push. And I don't know if Jeff Sessions is going to grab the Martin Luther King civil rights mantle torch and carry it proudly forward. I don't know if he's the man to carry that staff proudly forward.
All right, Stephen, well, you may be interested that the Attorney General will be at a Politico playbook breakfast this morning here at the top of the hour, 8 a.m., and she will be sitting down with Politico Playbook's co-authors Jake Sherman and Anna Palmer, talking to them about her tenure at the Justice Department and President Obama's legacy, and coverage of that begins on C-SPAN 2, cspan.org, or you can get the C-SPAN radio app at 8 a.m. Ed in Clarksburg, West Virginia, independent caller. Hi, Ed.
Hi, how are you this morning?
Good morning to you, sir. Go ahead and share your thoughts with us on this anniversary.
Well, my thoughts, the most important one, and I'm not very much on this Constitution because it seems like everybody, it's like the Bible. they can twist it whatever way they want to. But to me, the most important one, I think it's a amendment, is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that's the most important for one simple reason. That covers all the rest of them, then. You know, it's you've got the guaranteed life, you're guaranteed the pursuit of happiness, and you're guaranteed liberty.
Right, written into the Constitution. Well, Ed, if you want to learn more about the Bill of Rights and how they came about, the ratification of it, the National Archives here in Washington is holding an anniversary event at 7 p.m. tonight, Eastern Time, that is. And you can watch that on C-SPAN 2 or go to your computer, go to cspan.org. And like I said, that radio app, the C-SPAN radio app, is a good way to listen to our coverage here on C-SPAN. Gil in Jamestown, North Carolina, Democrat. Hi, Gil. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. The gentleman who just called in, he was referencing the Declaration of Independence.
Oh,
and having said that, the Founding Fathers, George Washington, James Madison, Monroe, and Jefferson, they were all slaveholders. And consequently, if you look at section, the first article on the Bill of Rights, section 8, it states that militias were to be formed to suppress insurrection. Now, all the Founding Fathers were slave owners, and they were extremely afraid because of what happened in Haiti with Toussaint Louverture, with the slave revolt. They were all afraid of a slave insurrection. And having said that, that is why in the Bill of Rights we have militias. And militias were organized in the states, you know, to hopefully prevent these so-called insurrections by enslaved people. So let's talk about history and history as it is. My favorite amendments to the Constitution, if you bear with me briefly, are the First Amendment, as stated by some of the previous callers, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which respectively abolished slavery, they gave us civil rights, and then gave everyone the right to vote. And so when we talk about history, I think it's such a fallacy that the Second Amendment has been twisted regarding militias and, you know, gun owners holding on to that, saying that that's my right to own a gun. The Founding Fathers, what they wanted to do was to have militias be armed, to have an organized army be armed, and the notion that everyone should be able to purchase a gun is just a fallacy.
All right.
Thanks. That's my comment.
That was Gil in Jamestown, North Carolina. Mount Airy, Maryland. Steve, a Republican. Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. The United States, we are the only country that is set up the way that it is with our founding documents. The people have basically the right under nature to be over top of the government. When they wrote the Constitution, they realized that it needed to be explained a little bit further. That's why they did the Bill of Rights. There's not one right that oversees the rest of them or more important than the rest of them. They're all equally important. That's what gives the United States the people the power to choose its own government and how the people want the government to go. Now, listening to comments from earlier about the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment has three different parts, or basically two different parts, the collective and then the individual. The militia, the states have the right for a militia. That's the collective. The individual has the right to keep and bear, and neither shall be infringed. I've studied the Second Amendment a lot. I'm in the process of obtaining my FFL. We're going to be training and all type of stuff. So it's kind of a big deal. And Jefferson was a big part of the Second Amendment. But that's my comment.
Okay, Steve. Well, you and others might be interested in the Philadelphia Inquirer is doing a series looking at the Bill of Rights at 225 years. And today's posting, the Fourth Amendment, all too relevant in a digital age. And this piece is written by Jeffrey Rosen. It's the 6th in a 12-part series on the 10 Amendments. And he writes this, that the National Constitution Center, we love all of the Bill of Rights amendments equally, but if I had to pick one amendment that gave rise to all the others, it would be the 4th, he writes. And the piece goes on, that's because the controversy that gave rise to the Fourth Amendment sparked the American Revolution, which in turn led to the Constitutional Convention and the ultimate adoption of the Bill of Rights. The controversy in question involved the hated rights of assistance that allowed King George's agents to break into the homes of colonists in Boston and elsewhere looking for evidence of failure to pay the hated taxes that led to the Boston Tea Party. After James Otis denounced the rights of assistance in famous speech in Boston in 1761, John Adams, who heard the speech, said it was the first scene of the first act of opposition to the arbitrary claims of Great Britain. Then and there, the child independence was born. So this is Jeffrey Rosen's piece, writing in the Philadelphia Inquirer. There's others by David Keene, the former NRA chairman, who writes about the Second Amendment in the Philadelphia Inquirer. The Fourth Amendment on your screen, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Dan in Georgetown, Massachusetts, independent, welcome, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think all these amendments in the Bill of Rights, like a previous caller said, work together. And once they start to get weakened, then the whole rights system goes away. I'm just a little bit surprised by the calls today talking about, how great these amendments are. But in reality, starting in 2000, and I'm sure before, these things have technically gone away because of executive orders and bills that have passed, like the Patriot Act, for instance, for one. These rights aren't there. It's fiction. We've tortured people. We say they're not Americans, so we can do it what they want. They don't apply to our Bill of Rights. That's hogwash. I think that's pretty much, it's an explanation of how to treat human beings. Illegal search and seizures, that's out the window. The Bill of Rights has been eroded. We've had little things that have happened in this country over the years that have eroded our Bill of Rights. And I think these things, once that happens, it sets a new precedence for something even worse to happen. Okay, for example, in Boston, the Boston bombing, that people's houses were invaded, told to get out of their houses, because of this threat of two guys walking around. So we're asleep at the wheel. Our government has been assuming too much control, and we're not pushing back.
And Dan, that also applies to data, which is what Jeffrey Rosen is writing about in this piece that I was just referencing on Philly.com website. The president, the CEO of the Constitution Center that we just spoke to earlier this morning. And he writes that saying, in an inspiring and unanimous decision in 2014, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote for the court that the police cannot search a cell phone without a warrant when they arrest a suspect because the cell phone contains so much private information. Roberts cited James Otis's speech denouncing the writs of assistance and has suggested that the Fourth Amendment had to be construed to protect our digital papers and effects. The Supreme Court is only beginning to address the challenges of 21st century digital privacy. It hasn't yet ruled squarely whether the government can track all of our movements in public places, for example, by following us with tiny drone-mounted cameras or seizing the geolocational information from our cell phones without a warrant. However you come down on the most hotly contested questions involving digital privacy, It's inspiring that all of the justices of the Supreme Court determined to translate the Fourth Amendment so it protects as much privacy in the 21st century as Americans demanded when they ratified the Bill of Rights 225 years ago today. So Sarah in Woodlands Hills, California, Democrat. Sarah, good morning. Share with us your thoughts on this.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for taking my call. I just had a comment. As is, we're being, perhaps listened to, followed, or perhaps our emails. My question is, when are we going to literally find out what are the main reasons? Is it because of religion or race or relationship with, overseas, that the surveillance and checking on calls or just being watched? When will that really be broken down for people like myself? I'm American, Persian, from Iran, Persian American, and I've grown up here, and I have family overseas, but it puts me in a very uncomfortable situation where I just want to make sure that I, as an American citizen, I'm safe and I am basically covered under the Constitution, where it does not get overstepped as far as my rights, and being as a Persian American and being able to speak overseas without any fear or any concern.
Okay. Sarah's thoughts there in California, Democrat. Some front page news for you this morning from the papers. Washington Times this morning at the headline, disgusted Democrat, not Russians, are getting the blame for this WikiLeaks. A WikiLeaks figure is claiming that he received leaked Clinton campaign emails from a disgusted Democratic whistleblower while the White House continued to blame Russian hackers Wednesday for meddling in the presidential election and asserted that Donald Trump was obviously aware of Moscow's efforts on his behalf. Craig Murray, a former British ambassador to Uzbekistan and a close associate of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, said in a report by the Daily Mail that he flew to Washington for a clandestine handoff with one of the email sources in September. He said he received a package in a wooded area near American University. Neither of the leaks came from the Russians. Mr. Murray told the British newspaper the source had legal access to the information. The documents came from inside leaks, not hacks. So that on the front page of the Washington Times. And then there is also this on the front page. Anti-Trump activists seize the GOP elector defections. State officials scrambled Wednesday to uphold the Electoral College process as a Harvard Law School professor insisted that he was closing in on enough Republican defectors to upend President-elect Donald Trump. Professor Lawrence Lessig said his group, Electors Trust, and two other organizations advising electors behind the scenes have found 20 to 30 Republicans who are considering withholding their vote for Mr. Trump at the Monday ceremony. That's this Monday coming up. An exodus of 37 electors will put Mr. Trump at 269 electoral votes, one shy of the 270 needed to make his win official and throw the decision to the Republican-controlled House. So that in the Washington Times. From the front page of the New York Times this morning is this piece about the situation in Syria. And look at the pictures, the images of Syrians here, especially those of children, top left and above right, have not resonated as other historic pictures have. Many of these pictures familiar to you from over the years, but also what has come out of Syria. And Michael Kemmelman for the Critics Notebook, his column, writes, they are bearing witness in real time, refusing to disappear without a trace. And in this era of connectedness, they are refusing to let us off the hook. These images spread via social media, unmediated, confirm that the people making them are still alive in that moment anyway. Related to that is the Washington Post editorial this morning, the meltdown in Aleppo as that ceasefire has failed, a bloodbath that will haunt humanity and indelibly stain Mr. Obama's legacy. And the newspaper writes that on Tuesday, Mr. Obama's UN ambassador, Samantha Power, delivered an impassioned denunciation of the Aleppo carnage, which she said would join the ranks of those events in world history that define modern evil, that stain our conscience decades later. She excoriated the Assad regime, Russia, and Iran, but offered no acknowledgement that the stain of Aleppo extends also to her, the president, and American honor. Those who will live with the long-term consequences of the Syrian catastrophe are unlikely to be so forgiving. Back to our conversation with all of you. We'll go to Darcy, who's 12 years old in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, independent. Darcy, thank you for calling in. And what do you think about the Bill of Rights?
It's not guns that kill people, it's people that kill people. And you should have a right to own a gun because you should be able to protect your families, because it's like someone wants to kill you because it was like a weapon. You should be able to protect yourselves or your family or like your friends or something.
Well, Darcy, thank you so much for calling in. What inspired you to pick up the phone? This conversation, or is this something that that you and your family talk about?
I just like the conversation, really.
Well, we welcome all ages to join to participate in our conversations every morning. So thank you very much. We'll go on to CJ in Richfield, Minnesota, a Republican. And CJ, what do you think about this anniversary, December 15th? We're marking the 225 years of the Bill of Rights.
Thank you very much for allowing me to get in on this topic. Greta, my name is CJ, and I've been listening to your show for years, from back when it first started. And my family, just to let you know, is 7 generations of military. So I had 5 uncles that served in World War II, and I can remember when they came back from the war, these are the stories that they told, that they couldn't get a job and they were treated real bad even though they represented this country. And the gentleman from Massachusetts earlier that called in was right on point when he was saying how the Constitution and Bill of Rights has been compromised so bad that even right now with the TTP going on in North Dakota, they're breaking a treaty that was ratified by the Congress in 1851, and nobody is talking about that. And there are so many violations of the 13th Amendment and 14th and 15th Amendment when it comes to civil rights, but they were upheld according to the movie Separate but Equal that was done by Sidney Poitier and Burt Lancaster on Separate but Equal. That movie inspired me to investigate more into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and you don't even see that movie being represented in the schools like it should be because it's educational.
Okay.
I didn't even know who Thurgood Marshall was.
CJ there in Minnesota. Michael in Little River, South Carolina, independent. You're next.
Well, the First Amendment is the most important amendment because it gives you freedom of assembly.
Okay, and tell us why.
Well, because if you can't go to your church or go to anywhere, you wouldn't have no right to worship God, and that's the reason why. All
right, Michael in South Carolina. Dina in Fort Myers, Florida, independent. Dina, what do you think?
Well, I had the police when I was living in California, one of the reasons why I left, pick my lock and come inside my house, and then first deny it, then tell me that it was legal. When I tried to get help with Civil Liberties Union, I just got a form letter saying they had too many cases and couldn't help me, and I got nowhere with anything. So to me, it's just words on a piece of paper.
Okay, Dina. All right, some other news for you. Front page of the Washington Post has the story about Trump advisor shared secrets inappropriately. A secret U.S. military investigation in 2010 determined that Michael Flynn, the retired Army general, tapped to serve as national security advisor in the Trump White House, inappropriately shared classified information with foreign military officers in Afghanistan. This according to new documents released. Although Flynn lacked authorization to share the classified material, he was not disciplined or reprimanded after the investigation concluded that he did not act knowingly and that there was no actual or potential damage to national security as a result. The investigation itself is classified, but the Washington Post reports that the Army documents provide the first official account of the case. Former U.S. officials familiar with the matter said that Flynn was accused of telling allies about the activities of other agencies in Afghanistan, including the CIA. And this is a story many of you probably already heard about this morning. Front page of USA Today. Yahoo breach puts $1 billion at risk. And a lot of sensitive data, birth dates, other information stolen in that hack. And then the Wall Street Journal, the confident Fed yesterday, Janet Yellen announcing that it raised the rates a quarter of a point for the second time only in the last decade. And she pointed to the economy as the reason why. We'll talk about that more coming up here on the Washington Journal. And then at Trump Tower yesterday, the president-elect sat down with titans of the tech industry. Amazon's CEO, Jeff Bezos, Facebook's COO, Sheryl Sandberg, and investor Peter Thiel, who organized the meeting. Apple CEO Tim Cook were just a few of the many people that attended. And according to the Washington Post coverage of it, the group agreed to meet with Mr. Trump every quarter to talk about the issues that they face. Jeffrey in Manassas, Virginia. Good morning, Jeffrey. How are you? Republican. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. Long-time listener, first-time caller here. I just wanted to start off by saying, just for full disclosure's sake, I'm an active duty military officer, and I have a very firm and strong opinion, of course, of our Constitution. And starting with that, what I'd like to keep in mind for everybody is that the Bill of Rights is really the icing on the cake, but it's not really the whole cake of itself. The articles in all their entirety are really what give our country its strength and its power, and especially to the citizenry involved. Now, that being said, first and foremost, the amendment, the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment is by far the big cheese of all the amendments. It really protects actually 5 fundamental freedoms of our society. You got speech, the right to petition the government, the right to religion, the right to assembly, and the right to freedom of press, all in that one amendment. Those basic ingredients are really, in and of itself, what a free democracy should really be all about. And by and large, that amendment is probably the building block, the keystone to all of the rest of the Constitution. And that being said, I know Second Amendment gets a lot of credit, but the pen is mightier than the sword, and without the ideas and the speech to go behind that, the sword really has no true value in and of itself.
Okay.
Now, if you separate that aside, the next 2 amendments for me that are truly important from the Bill of Rights are a close tie between the 5th and the 4th, or the 5th and the 6th, excuse me, because those what they both really do is recognize that you as an individual have a due process, have a legal process, and that the government in and of itself can't just go ahead and utilize any means necessary to go ahead and try to either take your stuff or your life and liberty. And having that jury by your peers in the Sixth Amendment is also a supporting aspect of that. So, in a nutshell, that's where I stand, and I thoroughly enjoy this conversation. I love your show.
Well, thanks for calling in, Jerry, in Manassas, Virginia. Some state news for all of you out of New Jersey. The Record reporting this story this morning. New Jersey newspapers to lose $20 million if a bill passes. A fast-tracked bill that would allow governments to forego publishing budgets, bids for services, and other public records in newspapers, and instead post them exclusively online, triggered debate Tuesday morning among legislators who were split on its potential impact on New Jersey's media landscape. Supporters framed it as a cost-saving measure for taxpayers in an age when digital news consumption is increasingly the norm. It was denounced by opponents as an assault on the state's newspapers that would result in less investigative reporting, staffing cuts in newsrooms, and reduced government transparency. And then there is this editorial this morning, Christie's Revenge, from New Jersey newspaper, and they write this: that Governor Chris Christie and his buddy, Donald Trump, share a disdain for the press. Christie is now taking his revenge. You can tell them the old boys in Trenton are doing something dastardly just by the timing. If it's awful, they move fast before the stink can travel far. So it is with this week's attempt to kill jobs in the newspaper industry on the bogus promise of saving money for local taxpayers. Governor Chris Christie, a vindictive soul who has made no secret of his hatred for the free press, is pushing it hard. And Democratic leaders, always ready to make a deal, even a craven one, are going along with it. The purpose of the bill, when you cut through the clutter, is to weaken the press, to defang the watchdogs who expose their bad behavior. If you want to give state and local politicians free rein to do their dirty business in the dark, this bill is a godsend. If you want to hasten the decline of the press in the era of Donald Trump, this one is for you. Be ready to rely more on fake news posted on Facebook. So that happening out in New Jersey. And then quickly in North Carolina, it's the New York Times with the story this morning about how the Republican-led legislature there is moving to curb the power of their new governor, a Democrat, in that hotly contested race that went on past Election Day, just called recently. After calling a surprise special session, Republican lawmakers who control the General Assembly introduced measures to end the governor's control over election boards, to require state Senate approval of the new government's cabinet members, and to strip his power to appoint University of North Carolina trustees. Republicans also proposed to substantially cut the number of state employees who serve at the governor's pleasure, giving civil service protections to hundreds of managers and state agencies who have executed the priorities of Governor Pat McCrory, a Republican. If the measure passes the legislature, where Republicans hold large majorities in both chambers, and Mr. McCrory signs off, they would significantly hamstring the new governor, Roy Cooper, who takes office in January. One more call on this 225th anniversary of the Bill of Rights. George in Virginia, Democrat. Thanks for hanging in there, George. Go ahead.
Yes,
we're listening, George.
I think the Bill of Rights is put out for the people, and I just think that the legislators misuse it, and they talk about stuff, and they put in language that ordinary people don't even know, and they make it sound good. Take, for instance, like down in Southwest Virginia and being heard, they have a right to work law. That sounds good. That's right. You should have be right to work anywhere you want to. But if they explain the whole thing, then they find out that that doesn't really mean all of that. So I think they should explain to the people what they really all about when they try to pass a law or something.
Okay, George, we'll leave it at that point. You got to turn that TV down, just a reminder to all of you. More calls coming up. We're going to talk with